Alright, welcome back. This is chapter 5. This is going to be a really good one. Got some stuff already written on this. We'll split this up into two because there's two visions. So it's a quick read. The vision of the flying scroll. So again, I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, a flying scroll. And he said to me, "What do you see?" I answered, "I see a flying scroll. Its length 20 cubits and its width 10 cubits. We'll talk about that. Then he said to me, "This is the curse that goes out over the face of the whole land. For everyone who steals shall be cleaned out according to what is on one side, and everyone who swears falsely shall be cleaned out according to what is on the other side. And I will send it out, declares the Lord of hosts, and it shall enter the house of the thief and the house of him who swears falsely by my name, and it shall remain in his house and consume it, both timber and stone." So I think the timber and stone is actually talking about the temples and different destructions of different temples for different reasons. If you want to pause and just read what we got here as far as the first one, essentially it's just talking about the scroll is probably not on both sides of a scroll. It's probably unrolled, but probably two columns, and then these sins that are on there having to do with the temple and pledges, which is not far off, I feel, because we're going to talk about what I think. But who cares what I think? But let's look anyways. Here, we'll pull up. This is actually from a post I did called "The Pearl War Will Happen Again." And then I thought we'd show you this picture because under Darius, who was the king during this time, remember the beginning, that was a pretty extensive empire. So even into Egypt, moving into Greece a little bit, very large. So there's Israel, Jews scattered all across this land. So Cyrus conquered Babylon, then we have Darius, then it leads into Xerxes and Artaxerxes, who were probably the kings or even the same king. There's a theory that after he lost to Greece, Xerxes just changed his name. Not a bad move. Like, hey, that guy's dead. Don't invade us, please. Happens anyways, but not a bad trick if you think about it. Because I think Josephus only gives 4 or 5 kings of this Persian or Achaemenian empire, because it was a Mede and Persian empire. So I think I've copied everything I want over into this Word document, so we'll just go ahead and read. So Ezra and Nehemiah are types and shadows of the two witnesses Zechariah speaks of. Remember last week we talked about the 2 olive trees, where Joshua the high priest, Zerubbabel are pictures of the high priest as well, or are pictures of the 2 olive trees as well, 2 witnesses. The current exile and return with Zerubbabel are fulfillment, but also a template for future prophetic unfolding of events. There is a strong parallel between Ezra and Nehemiah being the 2 olive trees, just as Revelation speaks of the 2 future witnesses who will perform similar roles. And we'll talk about why Ezra and Nehemiah are important pictures. The exile is not complete, so we're still in exile today, right? And there will be a great return one day, just as there was a return then, to some extent, not a full return, right? And there's this promise of a full return that was never really fully completed, right? There's partial fulfillment. We're waiting on the full fulfillment. There's spiritual redemption. We're waiting on the physical redemption. Parallels. One day with Jesus acting as a Moses-type figure. He's going to bring us back into the land, just like Moses brought them back into the land. Well, almost, right? He got to see it, right? But he got him close enough. In Zechariah 5, we see a flying scroll. And when we see flying, we got to think something happening in a spiritual sense. And I think it's cool to see maybe this spiritual idea, not like a physical kingdom before, but a spiritual kingdom that we'll see later on in these end times. So with 2 curses on it, the scroll is described as the same length as Solomon's porch, which was lifted a few steps above the inner court and supported by 2 pillars. I actually think I got a picture for you in here somewhere. This is a lot to do with Esther and everything, but there you go. There's Solomon's porch. That's where the Torah would be taught. This is Herod's later, and this would be facing the Kidron Valley. So there's Golden Gate there. That's the gate that's still there today. It's walled up. The Muslims walled it up so that they knew that Messiah would be coming back through there. So Solomon's porch, this was probably the same place that where that was, because the whole temple structure was moved back further west to make just room for a bigger temple than Solomon's was. So I think those are the only pictures I got there. So let's go back here, just so you can see what that looked like and what it looked like in Herod's temple, because they're both kind of considered the second temple, but bigger designs, right? All right, so flying scroll described the same length as Solomon's porch, which lifted up a few steps above the inner court, supported by 2 pillars before the golden temple door. Not the, and that's confusing because we got the golden gate. The door of the temple in Solomon's would have been gold. There would have been a vine on it. It was a picture of entering the garden, right? Which the temple's a picture of the garden. I think we talked about that a lot last time. Sorry, I keep losing my place. Where the Torah was usually read to the people, these 2 curses were against the 2 greatest commandments: love God, love your neighbor. Right? When Jesus is asked what they are, that's what he says. When Jesus speaks at Solomon's porch, colonnade, right, a little different place than in Solomon's temple. The temples are different. In John 10, he speaks of being the gate that all must go through, especially teachers and prophets. Thieves climb over the walls of the sheep pen, and this is how we will know false teachers. Do they recognize Jesus as the Messiah and fulfillment of the law? It should be a question mark there. In the second part of John 10, Jesus makes the claim that he is Yahweh's son and Messiah. So that's when he makes the big reveal, right, in John 10. So the first temple was destroyed, 586, because Judah did not love his neighbor by honoring the Jubilee year. So anyone who was in captivity or a slave or land was not being returned. 7 sabbatical years would be 49 years, and the 50th year would be a release of those in debt, and also land would be returned to the original owners. 70 years of exile for each sabbatical year not kept puts us at 1076, which is the year Saul was actually coronated as king. If we add those 49 years to the 586 destruction of the temple, that gives us that 1076 when Saul would have been king. So even since the first king, not obeying the Jubilee. So it's important. And it's even stated in Chronicles that is the reason why. And we try to come up with bigger, expansive answers, all these sacrifices and everything. Really, it's kind of the basic things that we tend to miss up that makes God the most angry. It's you should at least be getting these right. The dietary laws and keeping all these ritual things they're important, but you gotta love God, love your neighbor, right? So not obeying the commands surrounding the Jubilee year would be 10 Jubilees would have been missed as well. Boils down to not loving your neighbor by in fact stealing from them. This correlates with the curse on one side of the scroll Zechariah sees, or one column, if you will, because a lot of times scrolls are written with 2 columns, but it's not unheard of to have a scroll with such stuff written on the backside. So the first temple and Zerubbabel's temple were both made with cedar beams and large stones. Remember, that's what the curse is talking about. It goes into the structures made of stone and wood. We know Jesus is the Word, which includes the Torah. He is both blessing and curse to those who live righteously or wickedly. Jesus also answers the Pharisees that the 2 greatest commandments are to love God, love your neighbor. So, blessing and curse, right? Torah is all about bringing blessing into your life. If you don't do it, then it brings curses. It's just a result of not doing what it says. It's not like he's going to curse you for not doing it. Curses come naturally. He's trying to teach you how to live. So the Feast of Dedication of Hanukkah was when Jesus was speaking in John 10. Interesting that it's Hanukkah, right? We just had Hanukkah. This is significant because before Hanukkah, this feast was used to mark the dedication of the first temple to Yahweh. So it was already a feast, and even in the Gospels, it's always referred to as the Feast of Dedication, not Hanukkah. So there's already a celebration that Solomon started when he built the first temple, that they would celebrate every year. Remember that we built this temple. So especially in the book of John, we see Jesus often speaking based on the context of the Sabbath or feast that was going on at that time. And wouldn't it be unheard of for Hanukkah to be happening on Christmas? And that may be why the Greeks invaded the temple on the 25th. So they actually have been holding this Feast of Dedication on the 25th. And that's why the Greeks decided to, this is your Feast of Dedication. We're going to desecrate it on that day. So there's probably a reason they chose the 25th. It might have been just to, that's the sun god and all that. It might have been something like that. So this is from First Fruits of Zion. So a little article there. I don't know. Maybe I'll copy that if you really want it. I can send it to you. But this is a little excerpt from it. On Pentecost morning, Psalm 120 120 disciples of the Nazarene, Jesus congregated at the Temple Mount together under the cedar roof of Solomon's colonnade to welcome the morning of the holy day with prayer. The colonnaded courtyard consisted of a portico of monolithic white marble pillars covered over the cedar beams. The portico ran along the eastern wall of the Temple Mount opposite the Mount of Olives. When the Hasmoneans and Herod the Great expanded the Temple Mount, the Kidron Valley prevented expansion to the east, so the colonnade that faced the Mount of Olives marked the line of the original Temple Mount from the time of King Solomon. Kind of mentioned that before, right? Perhaps for that reason, the people called the portico on that side Solomon's colonnade or Solomon's portico. So it's possible they were even walking in the courtyard where the original temple was. Interesting today that Jews go up there and they go barefoot because we don't know where the original temple was. So this is kind of all hallowed ground. So they might even be walking through the Holy of Holies. So when they go up there, they kind of take their life into their own hands. And they probably get upset that tourists just go up there and willy-nilly wander about. I don't know if you're probably not even allowed to go up there anymore. I've been up there, I think 4 years ago we went up there, but it was still all the guards are actually Muslim. Sometimes you'll see Israeli soldiers, but usually they're actually Palestinian. They're just part of the Israeli army, right? So a lot of people have trouble with that concept. They're like, what? I thought they were always fighting each other. There are Palestinians. There are Arabs that have joined the Israeli army, right? So obviously they're great choices for being guards up there, since most Jews and Israelis wouldn't want to be on the Temple Mount. Jesus taught at that place where the Torah was to be read from the door of the first temple. The Temple Mount was expanded because the Kidron Valley prevented an eastward shift. The temple was moved west, putting the porch of Solomon as a colonnade right inside the eastern gate, known as the walled-up Golden Gate today, where Jesus will enter Jerusalem on his return as king, which is also prophesied by Zechariah. The court of the Gentiles lay to the west before the beautiful gate, which would be the Golden Gate, right, of Solomon's of time, or maybe I'm wrong in that. Hold on. Which would lead to the court of the women. Today, I forget what I said about the beautiful gate. I'm wrong. Today, Jews walk barefoot. I already talked about this if they ever did grow up on the Temple Mount, because they're unsure of where the holy ground is. It is likely the holy ground of Solomon's temple was walked on by Gentiles and women in Jesus' day too, just like today, right? The disciples expected Jesus to return as king any time to offer the final redemption for Israel, right? The physical redemption. They would have met in Solomon's colonnade, which stood beside the Golden Gate. Remember, Nehemiah built the walls and gates of Jerusalem. Jesus was perhaps referencing the main gate into the temple grounds as the way to truth and life. The temple represents an adherence to the law of Yahweh, but without Jesus acting as the Golden Gate, we cannot enter the temple grounds. It's like re-entering the garden, right? We need him to re-enter that Edenic state. I keep saying the garden state. I keep thinking of Jersey. So we can only enter into the eternal life by accepting Jesus as Messiah and obeying Yahweh's law, which is actually Jesus, right? We're obeying Jesus by doing that, honoring him. This is what Jesus is speaking about in the first half of John. In the second half, we see a tie to the second curse as well as to why this second temple was destroyed. Blaspheming the name has a lot more to it than using God's name as a curse word. It has to do with unbelief. To reject Yahweh's emissary is to reject God himself. Jesus was the cornerstone that the builders rejected, and the second curse from the scroll against Herod's temple went inside it. So the scroll, right, goes inside the structure of wood and stone. If we're talking about 586 destruction, not keeping the Jubilee. That's the first curse. Not loving your neighbor. Second curse, 70 AD, which we're probably going to state here anyways, but just to recap, is why they're destroyed. They didn't believe in Jesus, essentially. Perhaps the Jews were given another Jubilee's time to turn from pride and accept Jesus as their Messiah. Jesus could have been born 2 or 3 years before Herod the Great's death in 5 BC, putting the span between the start of Jesus' ministry and the temple's destruction in 70 AD closer to 50 years instead of the commonly taught 40 years. Nehemiah rebuilt the walls and gates. Ezra taught the truth of the Torah, right? We have a spiritual leader, we have a physical leader, 2 witnesses. And we talked about last time that the two witnesses are the prophets and the Torah, right? So Moses and Elijah, just a picture of the Word, which would have been the whole Bible, even at the time Jesus is teaching it. We didn't have the apostles writing. His scriptures would have been Moses and Elijah, the prophets and the Torah. Nehemiah built the walls and gates. Ezra taught the truth of the Torah, truth of Jesus. So these two witnesses represent both the physicality of walking in obedience while also having true faith. So let's move on to the second vision. Hopefully that was a little long-winded, but interesting stuff, I feel, is what those two visions speak of. So they're both fulfilled, the destruction of both temples. So Solomon's temple, why that was destroyed, and then why Zerubbabel's temple was destroyed, which is what we're talking about right now. So let's lead into the fifth vision here. Or, sorry, not the fifth vision. It'd be the sixth vision. Second part of chapter 5. Then the angel who talked with me came forward and said to me, "Lift your eyes and see what this is that is going out." And I said, "What is it?" He said, "This is the basket that is going out." And he said, "This is their iniquity in all the land. Behold, the leaden cover was lifted, and there was a woman sitting in the basket." And he said, "This is wickedness." And he thrust her back into the basket and thrust down the leaden weight on its opening. Then I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, two women coming forth. The wind was in their wings. They had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between earth and heaven. It's kind of parallel to the first part. Something's flying, heaven and earth. Again, an idea of a spiritual kingdom here, prophetically in the end times. And then I said to the angel who talked to me, "Where are they taking the basket?" He said to me, "To the land of Shinar to build a house for it. And when this is prepared, they will set the basket down there on its base." All right, so let's pull that document up again. Got some stuff here on the second vision. So in the second vision in Zechariah 5 is if another temple, so we have it taking the basket, this other temple, is this religion of Babel. Shinar is where the Tower of Babel was built. It's the woman who is wickedness in Jerusalem, who has become the harlot of Babylon, falls prey to their teaching, these teachings of these two women, these women with the stork wings. And these women with the stork wings are something that pulls Jerusalem away from her faith. Storks often feed on the dead. They use their long beaks, designed to pierce deep and rip out large chunks to swallow whole. They will change their migration patterns to feed on garbage or pick at the remains of a battlefield, right? Forgive all the errors here. Just listen to my voice. Don't read these. So yeah, why are they going east towards Shinar from Jerusalem? That's not a stork migratory pattern. They would have been more like Turkey and Europe area. They would come down. They would travel along the Mediterranean, where going through Israel, and then on their way to Africa, right? And then they would come back, and that's where the whole idea of the storks bringing babies. Storks are terrible creatures. I did some research on them. They're always like looking like a nice creature, bringing babies, because they would, you'd have your child, you get, married in the summer, and then, 9 months later, the stork is coming back, you're like, "Hey, we have a baby. The stork brought that baby." Maybe that's what they would tell their kids. That's where that whole little myth comes from. So as you've known, I've become to view the whore of Babylon as Jerusalem, as spoken of in Revelation. Jerusalem and its people who went to Babylon physically, but would go spiritually during the times of the final three empires, bronze and iron. So we got Greek, Hanukkah, iron Rome, and then iron and clay, which is the final empire, which is probably the spiritual empire that we keeps kind of getting hinted at too in chapter 5 here. So the women with the stork wings are strange teachings that have, in my opinion, that have brought Yahweh's bride into a dark spiritual captivity. Yah reserves final judgment for the nations at the end, but Jerusalem, his bride, will face constant testing. We see this all throughout the Bible and all throughout history. His people, Israel, are always being tested because he cares about them. He doesn't care about the other nations that are not obeying. So Yahweh will not bother with those who have no covenant with him. America has no covenant with him. There was, if you go back and see where our founding was, and we'll kind of look at these pictures, America is not a Christian nation. There's a lot of Christians in it, for sure, and there's religious liberty, but so there, especially in Persia, there was lots of religious freedom, at least on the surface, right? So there are believers in exile in America, but it is just a satrapy of Babylon, right? Because remember that picture, this is the world today, right? Just expanded. So there's Christians scattered all about it, right? And we all need to come back to the land. Eventually, New Jerusalem is going to be pretty much that big, right? It's going to cover all this area. It's going to be crazy. That's how big the base is of this New Jerusalem that's going to come down. I think we showed a picture of that last time. But, this northern kingdom just kind of spread it all. It's just bigger. It's just a bigger version of this. This is the whole world at this time. Now the whole world is different, and we're scattered all about. So there are believers in exile, just a satrapy of Babylon. Babylon is a spiritual kingdom. It's not just America, right? Even these pictures below, other European cultures and even ancient cultures today, the Arab cultures, they still kind of have these ideas of these two women. So the two women might be the Greek and Roman, empires. So it's the Holy Roman extension through its Reich. So there's the Third Reichs, right? So you got Hitler's Third Reich. There was the German Empire, which is Second Reich, and then there's Barbossa's Holy Roman Empire, which actually ended up lasting over 1,000 years, I believe, which is kind of the extension of the Iron Kingdom of Rome, right? And I don't think until Hitler fell that we entered into the iron and clay, this final empire. But it was been building and building. Go away, you're in my face. Whatever. Can't see. We'll just push that down. There we go. So a house is built, a temple is built for this whore of Babylon. A temple or religious system within Babylon is a possibility. So we talked about the storks already, eating garbage and dead. They will change those migratory patterns. It's probably why they're going to Shinar. Doesn't make sense, but they're chasing after death, essentially. So the two women could be pictures of Semiramis, Ishtar, Columbia today, which is Lady Liberty, right? The District of Columbia. Ever look at the Capitol building? That's her. She's up there. And then even in our cinema, we see her in Statue of Liberty. So showing how man's law stands in opposition to Yahweh's law. There's so many laws in America today, but we consider it freedom, right? So we have become obsessed with liberty and justice. Justice is the other lady, that we have missed the heart of the law and have wandered into legalism. So the wine of Babylon seems sweet at first, but is a bitter poison that rots away what it means to be a child of Yahweh. This liberty is false and leads to enslavement to our own desires for more, right? So there's liberty and justice. If we compare it to the Torah, there's going to be some things that are similar in America today. You think like, a lot of our laws came from this, but a lot of them, if you just think about it, that God is supposed to be king, right? You should be a monarchy is essentially what we should be under. So maybe the Brits have it more right than we do, but we have this body that controls us and tells us what to do, and we have this justice which is blind, and it's a false justice. And there's really no justice in America at all, even though we claim that there is justice. We claim that there is liberty. But it all stands in opposition to what Yahweh taught, what his kingdom is supposed to look like. It's a far cry from that. And maybe the black and white that you see with the stork wing is showing a possible distortion of right versus wrong. And I think as farther we get, the more we're seeing that this clear division between what is right and wrong. We're seeing there's gray is less and less. All right, so Ma'at, there is justice, who is, she's not blind there. She can obviously see, but with the scales, she was with wings there. You have her with wings. I think that might be her, Lady Liberty, I'm not sure. And that would be like the ancient Babylonian version of Ishtar, right, who is Lady Liberty. So we see these two women. They're often pictured with wings. Ma'at, justice, would be weighing, her scales are weighing like souls. So it kind of goes back to this legalism in America. It's like if you do enough good, you're going to make it to the good afterlife. If you don't, you're going to go to the bad afterlife. And it's kind of like this setting up of like, oh, you got to do the things, right? And less about, believing in Jesus, trusting in his word. It takes away from that. Yes, you should be doing things. True faith brings obedience. But we're all kind of chasing something that's wrong and it stands in contrast to God's word. So these two women may not be. It's just an idea that I had. First thing that kind of popped in my head, you say the Pledge of Allegiance. It's one nation under God. What God? Liberty and justice for all. These two goddesses for all, which are a corruption of God's word. Just because we say God doesn't mean that it's the true God. I mean, it can mean that, but what did the writers of it mean? Right? Because a lot of who created America and all these symbolisms and these statues that we see were actually Masons. But that's all I have. Just some thoughts there on Zechariah. Got a little crazy, but that's what I got out of it. So I'm just going to share what I got out of it. Let's see if there's anything left over in this. You can always pause and read. A lot on the lead-in cover. So go ahead, you can read that if you want. Just go ahead and pause. I'm just going to scan it, see if I see anything. A lot of the stuff we've already said before. So the wickedness, the woman in the basket, I do believe that's Jerusalem. Picture the people of Jerusalem that go into a spiritual captivity. They went into a physical captivity, but now a spiritual captivity. And physical as well, because even though since 1948 there's been Jews back in Israel, a lot of us are still in exile, right? So we got pictures of the temple, for sure, in both of these. We got a false temple, we got the true temple, we got a picture of why the temples were destroyed, and the first vision, and then the second vision. All right. Yeah, and he debunks that these women are not angels. They're like, oh yeah, women with wings. And we talked about the Watchers a lot last time. Like how can they, procreate essentially? Because Jesus says they're not giving you marriage. Well, the Watchers took what they wanted. They didn't have to be given in marriage or anything, and they were shapeshifters. But they're never pictured as women, but it's possible that they could take on the shape of a woman to deceive somebody. That's very possible. Obviously, all those Watchers were in prison, so they're not operating today. So any fallen angel that would be doing that is probably really going against some sort of special. I mean, they know that there's going to be special judgment against them if they ever try to do what these Watchers did before, because their judgment was so severe that they would never try to attempt such a second incursion as mixing with man again. But we do see Satan, at least, taking on different forms. So it's possible that these deities could be something like that. So we do, it does say in that, and in Ugaritic literature, and Ishtar, or Mesopotamian literature. So we do see those two as well. I didn't even read that before, but I'm glad that it confirms what I was thinking. So just trace them, those gods who are there today. And again, it's like even with Christmas, it's like there's lots of pagan roots. Sure, there's lots of things wrong with Hanukkah. There's lots of things that are pagan and added even into that. It's like, what are you doing on Christmas? Is it about Jesus? I mean, you can maybe twist that Christmas tree into something about God. Sure, because they would even bring branches of evergreen into their house to remind them of Eden, right? What's going to come back. We see the same thing with Sukkot, right? They had They would bring those first fruits of fall to thank God of what He's given them and to pray for rain for next year. These aren't bad things. These aren't bad ideas. But you read passages in the Bible, they cut down evergreens and they deck them with gold. And, don't do what the pagans do, right? But if you're doing it and you're doing it for Jesus and you're remembering His birth, even though it wasn't born on the 25th, that's fine. You find a gather and read the Christmas story, eat food. Nothing wrong with that, right? And I'm not going to condemn anyone for keeping Christmas because I don't know the reasons or why they are keeping it. Because I can be keeping Hanukkah with the wrong heart, and I could be keeping Passover with the wrong heart, and I could be doing it in a pagan way. So just because it's a biblically mandated thing doesn't mean that you can't be doing it in a way that offends Yahweh, right? I'll end on that. Happy holidays, everyone. Happy holy days is probably where that came from, right? Interesting thought. And the 25th could have very well been Feast of Dedication. And that's why the Greeks desecrated it on such a day.